afternoon. This is a special meeting of the Board of Trustees of the El Paso County Community College. Today is Friday, June 30th, and it is 2:03. This meeting is being held at the Administrative Service Center, President's Conference Room, A137 in El Paso, Texas, 79925. The meeting will be viewable through the EPCC YouTube channel. Refer to the link https://www.youtube.com/user/goepcc. Welcome, everyone, and can we call the roll, please?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Uxer.
Here.
Mrs. Robles.
Here.
Ms. Naheda.
Here.
Ms. Sanchez, Mr. Haggerty are not here yet. They will be here arriving shortly. Dr. Graham.
Here.
You can ask for
Do
the
we have any public comments? The El Paso Community College TESB policies limit individual presentations for any individual to 3 minutes under TESB BDB local. Do we have anyone signed up?
No, we do not.
Discussion items.
Item 5.1, Mr. Fernando Flores, Interim Vice President of Financial and Administrative Operations, will provide an update on the budget development process for fiscal year 2023-2024.
Dr. Graham and members of the board, want to thank Mr. Flores and his team for preparing a preliminary budget overview. They've done a very thorough job. I've had the opportunity to review this presentation a couple of times that was sent to me while I was out. And again, I want to thank Mr. Flores and his team for the great work and look forward to the presentation.
Mr. Flores.
Thank you.
One quick.
Yes, sir.
I apologize, but can you tell me what the date is for the 23, when does the 23-24 budget, what's the end of the budget year?
August 31st
August,
of,
okay. That's all I'm an Aggie, I forgot.
Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Graham, members of the board, Dr. Serrata, cabinet members in attendance. Thank you for the opportunity to present the first budget development workshop of the year that is going to be presented to develop the 23-24 operating budget. The workshop agenda today is going to cover an overview of the budget development process for fiscal year 23-24, an overview of revenue sources for 22-23 and projected revenues. We will cover the adopted budget for 22-23 and the projected expenditures. Then we will provide an update of the HERF awards and expenditures, followed by, towards development of next year's budget, we're going to do an overview of the 23-24 projected revenues, followed by the 23-24 baseline budget. Then all of this will come together as we pull together on one slide the budget strategies for 23-24. After that, we'll have a discussion about the 6-year financial model. Then we'll talk about next steps for adoption of the fiscal year 23-24 budget. This next slide details the main steps that are followed from the inception of budget development process throughout the year and with the ultimate adoption of the budget at the end of August as our goal. In February, the budget department conducted workshops for budget heads and staff and also had online training available where everybody could log on to their computers and access their budgets online and follow the budget staff. In February also, budget requests were completed by the various executive levels, which are in attendance today. And so the VPs review and reallocate budgets as needed. The budgets were submitted or due March the 10th to the budget office. Then March through April, the budget office compiles the baseline budgets. April through May, meetings are held with the vice presidents to review their respective budgets. And during these meetings, we check for accuracy and see if the VPs have any questions related to their budget submissions. So after that step, in May, there's review of the preliminary baseline budget with the president to include revenue projections and additional funding requests. Also, at that time, there may be a discussion for salary enhancement and any other budget strategies that may be considered. From June to July, there's a review and approval of additional funding requests by the president. In June and July, additional budget workshops will be presented to the Board of Trustees. This will culminate in August with adoption of the budget by the Board of Trustees. So these are some of the key timelines that will guide our process. And just as a reminder, the board has to approve a budget by August 31st. This next slide contains some of the main considerations supporting development of the 23-24 budget. First, we will look at fiscal year revenues, which are the basis for revenue projections for 23-24 fiscal year. Fiscal year 23-24 is the first year of the new biennium for 24-25. Fiscal year 23-24 budget is based on a rollover of the fiscal year 22-23 adopted budget, decreased by the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, HERF, reserve, and adjusted for any salary savings from vacant positions and any reallocation of funds by executive levels. Additional requests submitted by the executive levels are reviewed by the budget office and vetted for funding by the president. Then, we will evaluate a salary enhancement to remain competitive in hiring and retaining staff. So every year is different in planning for the next budget year. As of today, June 30th, 2023, that is the end of the program period for the HERF grants. This marks the end, and also what I would like to report is the college is expected to have used 100% of the authorized HERF grant funds amounting to $122,051,998. So this was a grant project that covered several years, and I would say that the task force did an outstanding job administering and guiding the allowable uses that the HERF grants were allowed to use the funds for. The task force consisted of cabinet as well as Mr. Bob Elliott. So there was a lot of discussion how to use the money, and ultimately it was a task force decision how it was used. And then we advanced our request to Dr. Serrata, who had the final approval along with the task force of what the funds could be used for. I would tell you that there were great controls surrounding the use of these HERF grant funds. The grant office was outstanding in vetting any particular use. Personally, I wouldn't approve anything unless Bob Elliott looked at it, because he's very meticulous and thorough. And also, I would say that the financial aid office was outstanding in allowing the funds to go to students and doing that on a very timely basis. So it was a very large group that managed, accounted, and approved expenditures of these awards.
Let me add, Mr. Flores chaired the group and did a phenomenal job of leading that group, so certainly appreciate all the good work, Mr. Flores.
Thank you. So as a reminder for fiscal year 22-23, these are the revenue sources that supported the budget of $158,143,134. It consisted, in first place, property taxes was the largest revenue source, followed by tuition and fees and state appropriations. Now you see HERF revenue recovery at the bottom on the right-hand side of 11.1 million. That will go away in the next year's budget.
Mr. Flores?
Yeah.
I just need to interrupt you for a minute to make it a record that Ms. Sanchez arrived at the meeting 2:08. Join us. Thank you.
Next, this is a breakdown of the expenditures by function. Yes, sir.
Back to the previous revenue adopted, so we have 2 months left, if I'm now understanding, 2 months left in this budget cycle.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Have we received all of these funds, or any of these projected yet to be received?
These are projected to be received.
Okay, so we don't, so this is a close estimation, but we don't know.
Yes, sir. That's a great comment. So the revenue estimates that we have are through May with actuals, and then we've projected June, July, August projected. So much of the information that you're going to be hearing and seeing today include projections.
Okay, now, then one other question then along that line. If they're projections, and I would suppose that charges against this budget are also going to be projected, and they will occur beyond August 31st date. So when can we functionally close the books on 22-23?
So expenditures were also actual through May and are projected through August. And so we cannot book into this fiscal year any expenditures received after August 31st. We'd be in violation of GAAP, and our books would not reflect that cutoff. However, we are projecting those as well in the numbers that we have.
Okay. So just out of curiosity then, what if we get, something comes in $1,000 more than we have allocated, budgeted, and everything else, and it doesn't come in until October 1? What do you do with that $1,000?
It would roll over into fund balance because it would be unused. We would be unable to use it.
No, it's a bill that comes in.
Okay, so if we get a bill, the key element is receipt of the goods or services. If we have not received or been provided those services, we cannot book it. We would not book that expense in this year.
Okay.
And that does happen.
Yeah.
And that does happen. But we have a very strict cutoff, August 31st, and that's something that we're audited on. They will pull expenditures as of August 31st, and they will test for receipt of those goods or services.
Okay, so functionally, barring exigent circumstances, August 31, books are closed. Revenue and expenses.
That is the cutoff for recording any revenues and expenses, yes, sir. So this is a picture of the revenue sources. So we move to the next information, which are expenditures by function. We follow the NACUBO classification categories in here. And so this as well is for 22-23. And so this is just a reminder of the components of the expenditure budget. The largest is instruction normally. However, in this slide, institutional support is larger only because it had the budget for the HERF reserve. But normally the instruction is and should be the largest budget grouping of our entire budget. I will go into this a little bit more as we look at the 23-24 budget. This is just a reminder of the budget that we're currently under.
So,
Yes, sir.
11.1 million HERF revenue recovery really is part of the 53 million institute support.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So this next slide as well is a different organization of the budget for 22-23. It's organized by expense category. And here, if you add up the salaries for faculty, 51.9 million, to staff, 44.9, and add benefits to that, it'll represent about 76% of the budget when we back out the HERF. At this point, it represents about 70% of the budget, only because HERF is kind of inflating the budget a little bit. So what the takeaway is from this slide also is the contingency of $12,373,534 is going to be reduced by the 11.1 of HERF reserve. So next year, it'll be drastically reduced. This next slide looks at the revenue projections that we were just talking about. It compares the adopted budget for 22-23 to our projections of revenues for 22-23. And here it includes 3 months of projections that are embedded with actual amounts through May. So the state appropriations is going to come in right on budget. There's no variance. The next item is HERF revenue recovery. It's coming in a little bit higher. It's coming in at $11,890,724, a variance of $786,337, largely because there's a small decrease of paying students. So that variance reflects us claiming lost revenue because of the decrease in enrollment a little bit. The overhead recovery budget compared to revenue is basically flat, very small variance. Moving down to tuition and fees, there's a decrease of $853,944 in the variance column. And for the reason I was just saying related to the HERF recovery, there's fewer paying students. So that shows the decline in paying students. The next line item, property taxes, is coming in $1,974,335 higher. And as a result of when we established the property tax budget, when we developed the budget for that, we based it on the certified valuations from the CAD. So the CAD, at the request of taxing entities, has factored in a discount on the certified values. And so that amount is lower than what the actual levy that is mailed out in October to taxpayers. The actual levy includes all valuations. Consequently, this revenue estimate that we have of $69,415,000 is still conservative because we factored in refunds of $1,500,000 into that. So that we feel comfortable with the $69,415,819 that we're projecting here, and it has produced a positive variance. The next line item is other income, and that's coming in above the adopted budget as well by $6,138,111. And that is the direct result of interest income exceeding the budget. So with the Fed raising rates so often in 22-23, we've been the benefactors of our interest rates going up. So that is a result of interest income exceeding the budget. The only thing I would say about interest income, it is a less predictable revenue source. So the college does budget for that very conservatively because it may not be a recurring stream of income that we can depend on. So as we talk about the 23-24 budget, you'll hear that that has been budgeted very conservatively. Moving down to the self-supporting line item, we have projected revenues of $1,152,000. with a variance decrease of $1.8 million, $1,847,717. And what I would say about that is the self-supporting accounts are just that. They do not exceed in expenditures what they have brought in revenue. That's why they are termed self-supporting, because they're not allowed to exceed any revenue that they collect. The bottom line on this slide in the middle column under projected revenues, we have projected revenues of $164,366,468 with a overall variance of $6,223,334, an increase of 3.94%.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
What constitutes self-supporting? Is that like tuition for CTE courses? I mean, professional development or sales of stuff out of the Coke machine and stuff like that?
No,
Is that what
sales out of Coke machines would be auxiliary funds.
Oh, okay.
Those would be auxiliary funds and sit in a different fund group. The self-supporting accounts are part of the overall unrestricted budget that we have. And what characterizes those is they're allowed to use the tuition that they collect.
Yeah, what is it?
Continuing ed.
Continuing ed? Oh, okay.
Primarily.
That's what,
Yeah.
Primarily, yes, sir.
Primarily continuing education.
Yeah. Largely in the workforce development area, they utilize those to test new programs, to try new ideas out. So this next slide is to show the anticipated fund balance increase for the year. Some of these numbers look familiar because we just talked about projected revenues. So in the revenue section, in the middle column, you see that the total revenues are $164,366,468, which was on a previous slide. And then our projected expenses, are projected at $132,736,486, resulting in a fund balance increase at this time projected at $31,629,982. A big part of this variance is because of the HERF lost revenue this year. That's a significant part of this. The other thing I would say is fund balance is meant to be grown in case of a future issue at the district. It's meant to protect the college. Also, it is looked upon very positively by the SACS COC accrediting agency. And also, rating agencies look at our fund balance when they're evaluating us. Budgets that are structurally sound will contribute to fund balance year after year after year. Because if the budgeting is sound, you're going to estimate recurring revenues in there to support ongoing items. But items that are not probable, like interest income, should be budgeted very conservatively.
just real quick, what is the current or with or without this 31 million? What is the total fund balance? How much money we have in it? Is that on another slide or is it just on?
It's not, but as it turns out, we started out the year with an overall fund balance of $51,729,000. We started the year with a positive fund balance of that amount.
Okay. So this is about 50% of that, okay.
So now we look at the strategic planning and development of the fiscal year 23-24 budget. These are the main considerations that we're going to be looking at in the next couple of months, and keeping a close eye on these because they're going to determine the overall budget that we have. So under planning for revenues, state appropriations are based upon the 88th Legislature, House Bill 8, Community College Finance Bill. This bill represents historic reform in the way community colleges are financed. On the next slide, we're going to give you more detail about the appropriations bill. Revenue projections for 23-24 will exclude HERF revenue recovery due to the award expiring today, June 30th, 2023. And so tuition and fees that we're going to project supporting next year's budget are based on the tuition rate schedule effective fall of 2022, and current year enrollment. No tuition rate increase is planned for 23-24. Property taxes projected are based on preliminary taxable valuation of $65.2 billion, resulting in a preliminary no new revenue tax rate of 10.8536 cents per $100 valuation. This will change. This is the first preliminary report that Laura had to compile this information from the CAD. And so this number will change.
Two quick questions. 65.2 billion, was that what was for last year, so we just rolled it forward?
No, sir. Last year, the valuation that our tax rate was based upon was $55.9 billion.
So this is 10 billion more.
At the moment, it is.
And
It's
we
going to
get
move,
that-
though.
And we get that as an that's based on information from the CAD, et cetera. Okay,
It's going to come down.
It's going to come down.
okay.
But-
Number two, that's good, that's fair. Number two, state appropriation, I know you're referring to this as a bill, the legislature keeps meeting, so is this a authorized, or is this should be, or is it a hope for?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mr. Uxer. House Bill 8 was signed by the governor 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And so the state allocated $683 additional $1 million to the community college sector. What is not definitive at this point is how those resources will be distributed based on the rules that are being formulated by Commissioner Keller and his staff, along with the Community College Finance Advisory Committee. I sit on that advisory committee. I actually chair the advisory committee. We're meeting every Wednesday. We have a meeting scheduled for the 5th of July, and then the last meeting will be scheduled for the 12th of July. At that point, we will move forward. There'll be an emergency meeting scheduled in August by the coordinating board. The board members that oversee the commissioner, they're slotted to approve the rulemaking that we will have advised on. And then at that point, then all of the resources and the funds will be determined and move forward. By mid-July, we will have a very good idea of what El Paso Community College resources will. I can share with the board that no institution will receive less resources than received in the last legislative session. So we received $31.5 million in the last legislative session. There's only one college actually at this point that will be in a hold harmless situation, which is Houston Community College, and their hold harmless is $150,000. So every institution should see an increase in state revenue.
Just
Save
what
Houston.
It is how y'all slice and dice it.
It is the establishment of the rules and based essentially yes, to answer your question, yes, that's accurate. But it is based on the values that will be assigned to each of the respective credentials of values, high demand credentials. Then you're looking at bumps for economically disadvantaged, academically disadvantaged, and adult learners.
That's what your committee will then decide on.
Yes, sir.
Is it a good working committee, or is it a bloodletting session?
It is a good working committee. There's a lot of significant questions, and there has been adjustments as well. I give the coordinating board, Commissioner Keller and his team, a lot of credit for taking suggestions that have been made by the committee and incorporating those suggestions into the rulemaking process. Dual credit is an example. So there was a dual credit proposal for the FAST Financial Aid for Swift Transfer Program. We made some significant recommendations, and those have been incorporated by the coordinating board based, again, on preliminary rules. Those rules will have to be adopted by the coordinating board, board members, if you will.
One last question.
Yes, sir.
The House and the Senate are now trying to negotiate a settlement for property tax.
It's a great
I mean,
question.
and so if they're deciding who and how, but does it affect us at
It does
all?
not.
Okay.
Does not affect the community college. It affects school districts, and in the last session, it affected the county and the city with regards to the no new revenue tax rate and what it was for those respective areas. Fortunately, and I knock on wood because every session this comes up, it has not impacted community colleges. Our rate, we can approve, the board can approve based on the administration's recommendation up to an 8% tax increase if we ever had to. We have not implemented a tax increase in the last 5 years. We're not going to be recommending one this year either.
Thank you, Dr. Serrata. So, planning for additional funding needs under this, a consideration will be salary enhancement for employees, and additional funding requests from executive levels will be evaluated as well.
Mr. Flores, I have
Yes,
a
ma'am.
question. Is it possible that we can visit the compensation or the salary for student workers? I was told that we are very, very low, one of the lowest in paying student workers.
Yes, ma'am. About half a year ago, Financial Aid visited with Ms. Shaughnessy and Dr. Peña, and they raised the rate to, I believe, $10 an hour. So they were listening to students and received the approval to raise that. So now student workers make $10 an hour.
And just so you know, where I work, they make 18, 16 and 18. Yeah,
County
so,
median
so
wage is
we are way behind.
I can tell you, I work for Burger King, and we pay $13 an hour, and that's at Burger King. So, just to give you an idea.
Wow.
And some of these are college students, or most of them are college students, I believe, so that's way too low. It needs to be revisited, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Who makes that decision then, if we're sitting here thinking we're responsible for the budget? So who makes the final decision? Let's say it's 10 and we want to go to 15. Who says, there's one entity that says, okay, it's done. Is that us?
I believe it is. I believe it is, so
But
what,
We would make a recommendation to
Or
the
the
board.
recommendation of the
Yeah, I know
administration.
the recommendations and go through all the committees and justification, but the yes or no comes from the 7 of us.
That's correct.
Okay.
I think for us, part of the issue was that we couldn't place any workers because of that,
That's
that
correct.
rate, so they didn't want to even work in our work-study program. So the last bullet on this slide is continued impact of GASB 68 and 75 on unrestricted net position is another consideration.
We brought it as part of the overall budget.
So regarding the appropriation, which Dr. Serrata just covered so well, our legacy funding model was based upon success points, core operations, and contact hours. That was a traditional model for our appropriation. We would submit all the contact hours, success points, that would be determined by the state, and then our allocation would be given based upon that information. That was the legacy funding model. Going forward under House Bill 8, the funding model has changed dramatically. It has a base tier, as Dr. Serrata was talking about, for colleges where local resources don't meet local needs. And the criteria that's listed below that are the considerations that they would be looking at. I don't know how that's going to happen. I'm just listing the way the information is rolling forward, and all the colleges are waiting to see the results of how the coordinating board rolls out allocations. We don't know yet, but this is a criteria. There's a base tier, and then there's a performance tier. The performance tier, as it's titled, is based upon performance outcomes. Outcomes that are now going to be considered are credentials of value, including credentials from credit and non-credit programs, occupational skills awards, institutional credentials that lead to a licensure or certification, credentials of value awarded in high demand fields, students who transfer with at least 15 semester credit hours to four-year universities, students who complete a sequence of at least 15 semester credit hours in dual credit courses. And then those factors are going to be weighted whether the people or the students are economically disadvantaged, academically disadvantaged, adult learners. So there's a lot of criteria that's going to go into that model to determine our appropriation. Yes, sir.
Go ahead, I'll wait.
We're expecting that there's going to be a run on July 14th that will be letting us know what our appropriation is going to be. That is, as Dr. Serrata mentioned, that's being worked on by the Rules Committee that he chairs, and the coordinating board is going to receive the recommendations from the Rules Committee, and then they're going to do a run based upon the criteria that we've submitted that's going to determine our appropriation. Yes, sir.
Okay, now I'm being picky. FTSE, I presume that means full-time student equivalent?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we don't know that. Again, you put the other thing in parentheses, put that on there so we know what it is. You don't have to sit here and think about it. Okay, M&O, maintenance operation.
Yes, sir.
Be clear, let us know. Okay, but what constitutes a student equivalent?
It's 15 hours that
Okay.
constitutes the full-time student equivalent instruction.
And then out of that, if you're looking at House Bill 8, just your perception, I know because this is to be proved, but what is the feel, what's the percentage rate that the colleges will see? Would that be a tier to performance, 60-40, 50-50?
Yeah, so the new outcomes-based model will have approximately 94 to 95% of resources that will be allocated based on performance. So the base tier resource will only account for 5 to 6%
Okay.
of the total funding. There's approximately 22 colleges that will qualify for that base tier resources. We will not be one of those institutions based on our tax base.
That would be the old 50 million that each college got.
That's actually absolutely correct. It ended up starting at 50 million. The last funding model was $68.4 million. So each institution received $1.644 million, $822,000 per biennium, per year of the biennium. That has been replaced by the base tier, and it's strictly for institutions whose tax rate and tax base does not allow them to raise. This part of the formula, I don't understand, and I pride myself on being pretty good with numbers. It's a very complex formula, but it impacts about 22 colleges that will receive base tier funding. We will not be one.
Only 5%.
Do you think that they're gonna do a better job with this outcomes-based model than they did with the success points? Because they sold it as a really good plan, and then they didn't hold up to the expectations of the success points, and we were doing well with that.
Yeah, Dr. Graham, it's a great question. And so the success points model, there was a lot of moving parts on the success points model, and TAC, the Texas Association of Community Colleges, had an impact on that. We suggested what model should be, and so you're looking at students reaching 15 hours, developmental students getting out of the sequence, taking that first college level course. There was a benchmark for transfer. There was a benchmark for graduating with a certificate and or an associate's degree, as well as successful transfer. The performance outcome, there's a lot of interest throughout the nation in what Texas is doing, from philanthropic organizations as well as from other states wanting to see how we're going to move forward with this. We essentially almost, it's going to be 94, 95% an outcomes-based model that is really focused on the credentials that Mr. Flores has up. There's been a lot of interest from the Gates Foundation, from the Lumina Foundation, from several others that want to study it and also want to provide funding for the organization, the Texas Association of Community Colleges, to continue to be able to implement this model. I do think that it'll be, I have no doubt, all 50 colleges supported it, and we all believe that it's the right direction for the state of Texas. The key becomes, Dr. Graham, this is a starting point. So the $683 million additional dollars is a starting point on a dynamic formula. What happens when the state's in an economic downturn is really the question.
And that's kind of my fear, because again, you know, they sell us a bag of goods like they did with the success points, and then they don't deliver it. The next biennium, we would change it back to something else.
It won't change, and that's where we take a little bit of solace. We will not go back to a different system. We'll continue in an outcomes-based model, but the resources that are allocated to that outcomes-based model may fluctuate based on the state's economic situation. Yeah.
Is this, the last one, the 15 hours dual credit, does this increase, to our benefit because we don't charge for the, I mean?
The estimation is it would increase to our benefit substantially, Mr. Uxer. This is the state that wants to equalize or level the playing field across the state so that all students have access to quality dual credit programs. We waive tuition and fees for our, by and large, for our dual credit students. And so as a result, we would see a significant benefit from the FAST program, the financial aid for swift transfer, where the state would be funding dual credit at a reduced cost. But when you waive tuition, we would receive that. We would receive that cost. Yes, it's been almost 11 years since Mr. Flores and prior to him, Ms. Shaughnessy, asking about resources for this particular segment of the student body. And we're happy to see that the state sees the value as well.
Well, somebody keep their mouth shut, we get through this.
I wonder who that could be.
Those are good questions.
And we have, in the charge, we have two responsibilities. He's one, and this is the other. So, spend this money.
So continuing with the strategies, Dr. Zerata just spoke about the acronym FAST. Stands for the financial aid for swift transfer. That's another component of the appropriation related to the dual credit students. So that is an appropriation. We're also waiting to hear what our result will be for that. Yes, ma'am.
Is it possible that they might have an allocation for that in the budget?
There is an allocation for that, Dr. Graham, and it is estimated currently that it would be $80 million for the state. And the distribution of that $80 million will depend on the number of dual credit students, the number of courses that they're taking, and whether those students are economically, as you know better than I do, the school districts define them as educationally disadvantaged. What we're really looking at is economically disadvantaged, so those students that are free and reduced lunch anytime once in the last 4 years will qualify as this segment. The estimations that I have seen for the sector is based on the state average. The state average for educationally disadvantaged students is 45%. Our region is obviously higher than 45%. The last data that I have indicates that 74% of Region 19 students are educationally disadvantaged. So we will be somewhere between 45 and 74% in this allocation. The estimation I've seen is significant, but our allocation should go up based on the percentage, as well as on an adjustment that the coordinating board made based on the recommendation from the Community College Advisory Committee.
Real quick.
Yes, sir.
Dual credit, all the dual credit programs across the state, do they have the same entrance requirement that we do? I mean, or do they have a different model to accept students into it?
No, they all have the same model, Mr. Uxer, with regards to who qualifies to be a dual credit student.
So then that's the 15-hour student credit then is uniform across the state there too?
That's correct. Now, the caveat is that these 15 hours are on a pathway towards a credential of value. So we can't have students taking dual credit courses that are just that are not part of a degree plan that is directed towards a credential of value. So other institutions offer dual credit programs. Business Computer Information Systems, BCIS, is one of those courses that there really is no value in students taking that course. We do not offer that. We are very strict on that. So another would be, for instance, kinesiology courses. Some of these institutions do that. Yes, sir.
I'm quiet.
Give them 2 minutes. That'll change.
So continuing further down on the slide, in the benefits area, we're still waiting for a health insurance appropriation from the state. We don't know what that is yet. Last biennium, we received $7.1 million for that. We haven't received the appropriation for this coming biennium yet. And there is a small increase in the state contribution rate for TRS retirement benefits from 8.0 to 8.25, effective September 1, 2023. We don't expect any major impact to the budget for that. So as you can see, all our revenues are still estimated at this juncture in the process. So the revenue projections for 23-24 are very important to considering how much we have to work with for the overall budget. So this gives us the first look at revenue projections for 23-24. So we are comparing these to the adopted budget revenue sources that are part of the current budget. For appropriations, we have this budgeted at the moment at flat because we don't know yet what our appropriation is going to be. As I mentioned, by July 14th, we hope to hear what our appropriation might be for 23-24. Overhead recovery is budgeted basically at flat. We have removed the HERF revenue recovery revenue. As we said, the grants have ended today, so we will not have that revenue source in next year's budget. However, as we do budget development on the expenditure side, we're going to remove the HERF reserve budget as well. So it's not going to have any impact on our budget. This is a good example of a non-recurring revenue. So this was available for any one-time use, but not to build sustainable budgets into the future. Under the local funds, you have tuition and fees that are budgeted at the current revenue that we're taking in the current year. So that is budgeted conservatively at what we expect to receive in the current year. We've budgeted that going forward. And so the next item are property taxes. So this property tax estimate is based upon the preliminary valuation that we received. And so that is going to change going forward when we get the certified values on July the 25th. We don't expect a lot of change for that, though. The property taxes that we're projecting also include an allowance for refunds of $1,600,000. So they are very conservative, what we are projecting here. We feel comfortable with the amount. It has resulted in a variance of $2.2 million on the positive side. Moving on to other income, we have a positive variance of $506,198. That largely is a result of two factors. We've increased the budget for interest income from $3.8 million to $5 million, and that is a result of interest rates currently being higher. But interest rates are very erratic and subject to economic news and what is happening in the world. So it is not a good predictable revenue source to budget at a very high level. I will tell you, in our current financial statements, we have doubled our interest earnings budget. However, we are budgeting very conservatively under other income, which includes interest income. The interest income is budgeted $1.2 million higher than the prior year at $5 million. So it's budgeted higher at 1.2 million, but in evaluating the FAST appropriation for dual credit students, we have removed the cost, the revenue associated with billing ISDs for reimbursing us for student costs where we provide an instructor. Our agreements allow for us to charge, to get reimbursed for our instructor cost. So we do not know if we can claim that, so we've taken that out of the budget. So that was a decrease of $800,000 in revenue that we had in the 22-23 budget, offset by an increase in interest income revenue of 1.2 million. We get the variance that we have here. The next item is the self-supporting line item, which is budgeted at 3 million last year, and we budgeted again at 3 million going forward. The takeaway from this slide is we project revenue to total $148,975,687 with this particular projection, a variance of $9,167,447 decreasing. Yes, sir.
Actually, if you take HERF out and you look at it, the property tax increase actually mitigates it by what, that 2.3 mil? Yeah.
Yes, sir. So it's an overall decrease of 5.8%. So next, that projection is composed of these pieces right here. The property taxes are still the highest, $69,712,992, or 46.79%. Followed in second position by tuition and fees at $37,844,895, or 25.4%. Followed by state appropriations as the third largest at $31,592,917, which is currently budget flat without the new appropriation amount. Followed by other income, self-supporting, and overhead recovery. So this next slide shows the baseline budget in the middle column. That is the 22-23 adopted budget that has been adjusted by removing the HERF and been adjusted by any vacancies or new positions brought in at the entry level. So when we look at the total of the baseline budget column, we see that it results in $146,388,137 compared to the adopted budget of $143,134. It's a variance of $11,754,997. And of course, the biggest item in there is we have removed the HERF revenue. And you see that on the financial and administrative operations line item. If you go across, a reduction of $11,367,224. The other decreases reflect the movement in positions. So that baseline budget interprets into these different functional budget groupings that we have here. Now you see, after removing the HERF, we see where instruction is now the largest overall area at $50,188,706, 34.28% of the total budget, followed by institutional support at $42,185,253, 28.82%, followed by academic support, $17,687,773. When you combine instruction and academic support, you get about 46% of the overall budget. That's a very large part of the budget. But that actually is where the larger funding should be. So then the next group after that is operations and physical plant, $12,239,599, followed by student services, $10,064,216, followed by public service, followed by transfers, $7,608,255, followed by public service and research. The self-supporting programs are at $3 million.
Real quick, what in general comes under institutional support and academic support?
So academic support was going to be all the deans, all the areas supporting instruction, largely.
But that is not instructor salaries, is it?
No, sir, those are sitting in instructional support.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
okay, that's what I understand.
Yes. Institutional support are all the support, administrative support areas throughout the district. So now you see that same baseline budget organized by expense category. And up in the contingency grouping of $1,030,000, you don't see the HERF revenue in there anymore. On this particular slide, if you look at faculty salaries of $51,814,000 and add those to staff salaries of $44,625,000, add in benefits, you get about 76% of the operating budget in salaries and benefits. The other large grouping in here is supplies and services, $24,986,679, followed by transfers, $7.6 million, and travel and contingency and equipment. This next slide shows the additional funding request that Ms. Diaz has received in the budget office. And it is broken down into two categories, the critical needs and other funding requests. The critical needs are things that are deemed essential and we cannot get away from funding them. For example, the Central Appraisal District fees increase of $60,000. That's a direct result of the CAD, the Central Appraisal District, passing on their budget increase. They pass that on to all the taxing entities, and we have absorbed our proportionate share of their budget increase to the tune of $60,035. The next item, partial funding for critical frozen positions. We're looking to release from the frozen positions list certain positions in the different executive areas that are deemed essential, and they would like to bring them back into the budget. They're currently not budgeted for.
What are examples of some of those?
So I would maybe kick that back to my colleagues to see what they're requesting, but one would be in the IT area if they have a database manager that was vacant at the time we froze the $6 million worth of frozen positions to balance the budget in the past. If they're saying, well, I need that IT person, they would pull it off the frozen position list. We maintain that list going forward. We don't lose track of those positions. So that might be one example. In our shipping and receiving area, there's a position we're eyeing to bring out of the frozen list, to bring back a full-time position because we're having a hard time recruiting part-time people to help us in shipping and receiving. Personally, in the finance area, that's one we have our eyes on. I think that we have another one in the instructional service center. We're wanting to pull off the frozen position list. Those are my particular examples. I don't know if my colleagues have any examples. And since everybody's looking down, I'll take that as a no. So continuing on with a list of critical needs,
Sorry, I have a quick question. On
yes,
the
ma'am.
other funding requests from executive level, so these had previously not been budgeted for in the budget.
Correct.
So can we just kind of break that down a little bit in terms of like, okay, external relations, communication, and development? What are some of those programs that we're looking at to include? Or who else can answer?
Sure.
Yeah, so Dr. Mo can respond to that, Ms. Sanchez. But I asked Dr. Mo, just given what we're looking at is increasing the amount of marketing that we're going to be doing at the institution, things of that nature, but I'd ask Dr. Mo to respond specifically, please.
Yeah, so it's for marketing outreach efforts as well as personnel, because the marketing staff is significantly understaffed for the demand of the content that we need to put out, and that increased funding is to address those needs.
Okay. And then can we go just down the list?
Sure.
For my own benefit, sorry, did you want to go on, elaborate on
Just
that?
speaking of that, somewhere along the line, let's identify a rate of return of expense on marketing, saying that going out and putting out signs on the deal actually increases. We spend $1 on the signs, but we get at least $2 in enrollment. I'd like to see a return, somehow we estimate that this additional marketing and advertising actually pays for itself and is a benefit, a positive cash flow.
How do we quantify that?
Yeah, so it's a great point. So what I would say is what we can do is we can speak to the number of views that it would receive. We can also look at the timing of when we place those, for instance, a billboard, and we can look at that with regards to the enrollment process and see if we see a spike. It's not a direct or causal relationship, but we can absolutely show that there is a bump. There's other mechanisms of marketing that Dr. Mo and her team have moved forward. Specifically, social media is become a prominent part of the marketing. And again, we can tie when we put out those messages to see if we've seen an increase, but we can't. It's very difficult to show a causal relationship.
Acceptable in the business model.
Yes, sir. Ms. Sanchez would like, Mr. Flores, you're up. If you can, the 51,000, I would imagine that's one position, but that's what
Sure.
Ms. Sanchez is requesting.
Sure, so the 51,000 consists of a part-timer for $18,000 and then to fund software in the purchasing area to help them evaluate requests, bid request. It's a software that Ruben has asked for in that particular area. In the instruction and workforce education, the $1,536,000, Ms. Sanchez, that particular one consists of $736,097 of full-time positions, $111,000 of part-time positions, and in the supplies and services area, $382,000 roughly. Travel, $37,000. Equipment, $50,000, and other of $218,000 in Dr. Mitchell's area. I don't remember what that was, but that should pretty much total to your 1536 number.
I'm happy to talk further about that if you're interested.
Sure, go for it.
So, actually, when we froze all the positions, there were a significant number of positions under recruitment, and so we're bringing some of those back to the table. It runs the gamut from faculty to lab assistants, office staff. But a lot of the expenses are initiatives that were put on hold back in the day. So you saw our critical requests and other funding requests. One of the things that Dr. Mitchell is being asked to do in her area is the social services program. So that's $388,000 of that dollar amount. The First Year Experience Center was largely funded, or those centers were largely funded under a grant. We're now institutionalizing some of those positions and those activities. And so that's a pretty big dollar amount for that. The Veterans Resource Centers are highly understaffed, and Dr. Mitchell was asked to kind of take those on.
Understaffed or not staffed at all?
But I'll say understaffed, Dr. Graham. And so what you see in there is the right sizing of the staff for those services for veterans and their dependents as well.
Great, thank you. And then if we could keep going just very quickly. So you already did financial admin information technology?
I'll ask Mr. Fernandez to speak to that, Ms. Sanchez. The only caveat that I'd bring forth is, I have not met with the vice presidents and pared this down. So
Okay.
what you'll hear is the big ask.
Yeah.
It isn't the final ask.
Yeah, and that's helpful just to know. I mean, obviously, if it's included in here, just would like to kind of get an idea what you're looking at. I mean, what I'm hearing, big picture, are positions that are needed to kind of put forth what the Board of Ed is asking for. So I think it's just helpful, and however that gets pared down,
Sure.
we'll revisit that. But going back to information technology.
So for information technology, the $33,000 is broken down into 5 part-time positions, 3 in the technical support area, 2 for the help desk. And that is actually, it's additional hours for the part-time staff that we have. And because, as it's already been mentioned, that we have several program positions, we've been having to now add additional hours for part-time staff, and that is to cover the deficit of those additional hours.
So, what do we pay per hour?
So it
It's
depends
not
on
the $10 an hour, is it?
No, it's not, it's not the $10, but
Okay.
it's a little bit more than that.
It's 11.
As much as we would.
Is it competitive?
Well.
No, it's not.
Well, I want him to say no. I know that that's his answer, but he wants to put, if you don't say no, well, then we're gonna say what we're
Well,
gonna
that
say.
is something that, Dr. Zapata mentioned, that
Ask
we're
aggressively.
working on trying to get it.
Listen, this is the very first board meeting I had. I asked you again, did you get enough of the memory from the machines? If you need it, ask for it. You're not gonna get it if you don't ask for
I
it.
understood, sir, and I have asked, and so we're putting a plan together to.
Well, then don't tell me,
Make him competitive, yes.
But one of the things that I hope you know is that we realize that you need more help. And if we're gonna be attracting more students, we need to have the manpower that's going to service them, either in recruitment or help desk or technology. But, you know, it's something that and that's, I think, why we ask so many questions on that, because it's not that we don't want to fund them. We just want to make sure, because out in the community, like I called Dr. Amaya about, you know, that at SISD, there's always, when there's orientations and all that, there's always the presence of the other colleges. And then we need to have the presence of the community college there, and right away he responded. I don't know where he picked up the person, but he had a person there, and, you know, those are very important positions, because they are personally recruiting the potential students.
just as a general thing, I don't know if we recognize it here, but we're fighting 2 things out in the public. Number one, the general concept that you'll hear on Fox News or NBC is that the universities are way overcharged. They're charging too much money. They're taking too much money. They're too rich, yada, yada, yada. But then on the other hand, we're hearing, you know, hey, you're not paying enough, you know, so, you know, I can't go to work there. They don't pay, but yet, look, the university is getting way too much money. You're, you know, so we gotta understand where we are.
And just for the record, Judge Hegarty just joined us. Thank you for your presence here, sir.
Hi, Judge.
Been a long day already.
Research accreditation and planning?
So that's me. I have 2 full-time positions in that ask, one for institutional research for a support person, and one in my office primarily, but would be a college-wide resource for serving as a liaison, communicating data to the language, helping translate the data into meaningful information. I also have 2 very small supply requests. Some of our outside vendors have increased their prices for services. And then I have 2 one-time costs, which will not be an ongoing burden on the budget, to update some IT equipment in my conference room and to offset So again, another vendor for one-time service.
You can't fund that out of your petty cash.
Okay, or I could change the request to petty cash.
No, I'm talking his petty cash.
Oh,
As I
okay.
say, you know, if they're IT, why can't you just go across all and say, give me?
It is woefully out of date, and because we've been neglecting those updates for a while now, we're in dinosaur mode.
But we're making progress.
And you were the-
So next up, we have student and enrollment services.
That's me, Ms. Sanchez. So, several positions, I can list them here. Center for Students with Disabilities is requesting a project hire manager. Project hire is something that was just emailing with Dr. Smith and VP Permazich. They work with students with disabilities, and they're supported by workforce and getting them into the workforce. We've had the program, it's a grant, we've had it for quite a while. We're needing a manager in that area. Police department needs another full-time dispatcher. We've been having a tough time with our dispatcher positions we currently have. I mean, just in the hiring, we have police officers serving in those positions right now. Admissions and registration is looking for a manager for specialized admissions. That's like nursing in some of those areas. So we have people who run it right now, but we need a more dedicated staff. We tend to have these reoccurring issues every year as specialized admission starts. And then the police department, during the pandemic, chief's senior administrative associate, that position was frozen. So he's been running the office with a part-time, higher than 19 hours a week, part-time position.
Speaking of that, and Governor Abbott's requirement of what, for armed guards, does that apply just K-12, or does that, additional protection police affect us?
It applies to K-12.
But we don't, there's not an additional requirement for us.
It is not an additional requirement for us. The early college high schools, those would be a requirement, but those would most likely be funded through the school district proper. I'd have to verify with regards to the 4 on campus, because we have our police force, and therefore our expectation is that our police force is protecting the
Well, it's
campus.
like at Paso del Norte, that campus is totally separate. So if it's there and we can't they can't say that our police force can satisfy that requirement, then that's an additional position who the school would have to fund?
More than likely, most likely, yes, sir.
So those are the positions. And then we asked for our critical needs, and I'm gonna try and remember them all just for you. So, police department is needing some upgrades to their equipment in the dispatch area. So we have to stay current there. They're also requesting, and we were funded last year for improvement to our security cameras. So there's a big ask again this year to finish that up. So
Ring the doorbell.
you might need to get some of those too. The daycare needs some of those. For a lot of the areas like new student orientation, recruitment, some of those areas that are out and about in the community, they're asking for additional travel funds, in-town travel, as well as the ability to get funded to go to more conferences, professional development. That's been a common ask across a lot of the departments in my area.
Apropos of that, did we give just a credit card for them to use for gas?
It depends on the areas.
And so, increase in travel funds, you see graduations, our annual cost for graduations keeps increasing with our partner. So we're asking for that to be a more set budget, because we come back every year and we ask for a little bit more.
I have a question on it. On the other college high schools and the graduation, EPI and East Lebanon Socorro pay for,
They do not.
No, they pay for the ones for the kids.
They do not. They're considered our students at that point, Judge. They're graduating from the college, and therefore, we handle that through our budgeting process.
That would be just incremental.
And you're talking about positions. How many positions are we budgeting now that aren't frozen, that aren't filled?
Mr. Flores, we have $3 million,
How much?
if I'm not mistaken. Is that accurate, Mr. Flores? And I see Ms. Day is pulling out her notes.
I believe we have about 9 million.
9.
Nine.
That should cover all
Those
that.
are frozen salaries.
9.3 million.
That's
These are
frozen.
unfilled,
Those are vacant.
these are
That's what I'm
vacant,
saying, they're
unfilled
vacant
positions.
salaries.
They're not frozen, they're.
Well, I mean, the money is frozen off books.
No.
No, the money's in the
No,
books.
I mean,
It's in our
the whole
budget.
city.
It's there, but we just don't have.
We haven't
They
been
have
able to fill them.
vacant positions they haven't filled.
Right.
That should cover all those, that 3 times.
Okay,
And
thank
then,
you.
and then there's one more. It's probably the biggest impact in my ask there, my request. And that's for CRM, which is our client or customer relationship management software. We don't have one in our area. And so the cost that we propose or that, that we're estimating, there's a high initial cost to get this started working with IT, initial implementation, and then the cost decreases over the years, but this is essential to allow us to track students. It's not just in the student services side, it would work with counseling and advising, it could work with other areas too, and then lets us communicate with the students. And there's a lot of data we'd be able to pull from that.
And then just the last one was on working, continuing education.
Yes, that one's fine. So there's 3 basic requests there. On one, we have a division supply budget that has been covering the cost of all the postage when we mail out the continuing education registration guides. So we've been falling short there, and we've been pulling out of other self-supporting accounts to cover that. So there's a request of about $11,000 just to be able to cover our annual postage cost. The second one is somewhere between $20,000 and $25,000 for some repair work to a parking lot, but it's essentially the motorcycle pad for our motorcycle courses on the continuing education side. And those are hosted through our law enforcement academy. And then the third is the largest ask, and that's a construction project. It's to build an outdoor pad for training for the law enforcement academy. So they have an interior room right now that has a padded surface. This is where they do the hand-to-hand training. They need to be able to throw people. They'd like a larger space, and we can build that out fairly cheaper than building another structure or remodeling a roof. That can be built outdoors with essentially just a padded surface, a new type of material than what we have now, but essentially just walls and a light covering over the top, and I think it's a spray system for warm days like today.
Thank you.
2 observations, just from experience. Start off with your big ask first, because what happens is that if you ask all the little ones and then you get to the big one, the perception is more. No, start off and say, and oh, I got a couple of little ones. Go big down. Okay, bottom line up front. Okay, number 1. Number 2, something for you, I heard from you, and I think I heard certain things others. I've been taking a little bit from this fund to that fund, and that, maybe this is Dr. Serrato. If you see this borrowing from one fund or having to manipulate it, that organizationally creep until you find out that all of a sudden across the deal, you got a bunch of movement, and you're not funding what is there, and you're restricting one area, and you're not funding another area, you're not treating it fair. So when you have something, hey, if it's there, let's make sure that you got the postage money, not that you don't have to go rob the motorcycles for stamps or something like that. And I heard that from somebody else that indicated that, we have the idea that we have sort of, because all of a sudden what happens is that you look at a budget as, well, I've got this, but there's a little bit nowhere you have unobserved slush funds. And if you don't take care of it,
Well, I
it
think
grows.
from a public perspective, I would not use the word slush funds because that really connotates something and it means something in a legal sense. So I would refute, I think, using that word. I think in this, at least for this organization and knowing just the financial soundness and the confidence at least that I have in this organization, I wouldn't want to use that particular word, but understand the context that you're going through.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Engineering terms, we wouldn't use slush funds.
That's it. Those are my questions. Thank you all for elaborating.
Good questions. So we advance the presentation to the funding strategies, and this particular slide brings together the projected revenues. If you looked in the no salary increase column, you see where projected revenues of $148,975,687. We talked about how we came up with that number previously. The baseline budget is $146,388,137. When we subtract those two, we have a preliminary budget surplus of $2,587,550. We just talked about the critical needs on the previous slide of $1,702,970. That results in a budget surplus of $884,580. This particular slide shows a salary increase for 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, and 5%. So down here under salary enhancement, right here, if you follow across this row, you see the value of salary enhancement at the different percentages. If you look at the salary increase for the 4% column, when you add in the cost of a salary enhancement, 4%, it results in a cost of $3,716,200, resulting in a deficit for that column of $2.8 million roughly. And so if we did not have any other revenue sources, we would have to look internally to fund the $2.8 million. But as we were having the conversation about appropriations and expecting to see on July the 14th what our appropriation picture looks like, this slide may change considerably when we're able to update our revenue estimates.
So this will change then?
Yes.
Okay.
These are very preliminary numbers, and we're still waiting to get the certified tax valuation on July the 25th. We're going to adjust our property tax revenue a little bit. So we're still looking and moving towards the fall enrollment. We're going to get a picture of what fall enrollment looks like and maybe tweak our tuition and fees estimate a little bit. But the big one here is the appropriation, which is still out. Recall that I budgeted, or we budgeted, flat. Based upon the current appropriation, that's budgeted at flat. Dr. Serrata talked about fast appropriation and outcomes-based appropriation. That is still in the works. What we don't have here that is a considerable item, and if you recall Ms. Sanchez's questions on other funding needs, the $2.9 million, that is not worked into these scenarios yet. But those requests still need to be vetted by Dr. Serrata. Yes, sir.
Two things. First of all, I remember, 3-4 years ago, we had a survey, the green villages came in and looked at all this. Okay.
Evergreen.
Evergreen, has that, and so what's the status? Are we still happy with the concept of that, and it's something we can work with, or are we examining that, or something we need to look at?
So it's an interesting question, Mr. Exter. So Evergreen came in actually 2014, did their salary and compensation, or salary and classification study, and then we moved forward with implementation of the recommendations in 2016. So it's been 7 years since we conducted that study. Obviously, the market has shifted in a post-pandemic world. Supply chain and labor pool has become a significant challenge. we may come to the board in the future requesting a compensation study. It's our understanding that TASB, who we have a contract with, is able to conduct such a study for a significantly less cost than we did with Evergreen. But I continue to check with colleagues to see where they are in moving forward with that. We just implemented this in 16, it's been 7 years. So they recommended at that time that compensation study be conducted every 10 years. I have a colleague who is conducting the first compensation study at her institution this year, and she has been the chancellor of that institution since 2009. So obviously, the compensation study, they want to make sure that their revenue continues, and so they recommend a time period that isn't necessarily consistent with what we see. So that's first time in 14 years, at least 14 years, that that institution is conducting a salary study.
Okay, and the next comment, I want to keep in mind, I'm not prejudging anything, I'm not advocating anything with salaries or anything like that. I just want to make a note that we get this money. This is not our money. This is the money, I mean, the state gives us some money and the tuition money, but we go to you go back here and see how much was property and taxes and everything else. And it really, that's what's visible to the public. And so the public, they're paying that. They just went through this pandemic too. And this is not a rich community. There's a lot of people out there. So we just need, as Ms. Sanchez says, we need to be mindful of the fact that we're spending other people's money, so we need to make sure that we're being fair, not only to the people that we're working with and that are employed, but we're being fair to those people that voted for us to be in this place in the first place, in entirety.
Are there any questions on the funding strategies? So we've been talking about developing the budget for 23-24 for next year. Now we're going to talk a little bit about multi-year budgeting best practices. So local governments are required to pass a balanced budget. According to the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, which interestingly is the certifying body that gives a certification for the ACFR every year. They have very high standards. The budgeting best practices include the adoption of a truly structured, balanced budget, one that is financially sustainable for multiple years into the future. EPCC's Board of Trustees has a history of approving structurally balanced budgets in which recurring revenues fund recurring expenses. And that allows for the growth of reserves through its fund balance, which is the accumulated excess of revenues over expenses since the inception of the college. Recurring revenues are the portion of the government's revenues that can be reasonably expected to continue year after year to some degree, with some degree of predictability, such as property taxes and tuition from students at EPCC. We talked a little bit earlier about interest income. It's hard to predict interest income. So that's a great example of a non-recurring revenue that we would budget very conservatively, and we have. Recurring expenditures appear in the budget each year, such as salaries, benefits, supplies, and services. One-time expenditures such as equipment and capital projects are non-recurring expenses in nature and require a different source of funding. Recall that in January of this year, you received a presentation from Mr. Rick Lobato on capital projects. He presented a multi-year capital projects plan, and that's what they're speaking to here as well. A different pot of money that funds capital projects, but totally different from the unrestricted budget. Reserves represent the accumulated fund balance set aside to hedge against risk. Generally, 15% of the budget is recommended per the external auditor's recommendation. Although the rating agencies want to see 25%. Part of best practices recommended by GFOA is to prepare and maintain a long-term financial plan that projects revenues, expenses, and financial position at least 5 years into the future. The plan should be reviewed on an annual basis and updated as needed as major assumptions change. Long-term financial planning should be the starting point for capital planning, developing operating budgets, and estimating revenues. Recall again the capital plan that Mr. Lobato presented through August of 2025. That was a multi-year plan. That's a very good example. EPCC presented to the board a 6-year financial model prior to the pandemic, which proved to be difficult to follow in light of the unpredictable revenue sources. What to consider with the 6-year financial model? Well, in 2020, budget development consisted of considerations for declining enrollment at EPCC. There was high unemployment, potentially impacting property tax collections, and potential cuts by the state. All of the college's major revenue sources in 2020 were under severe pressure. Consequently, the budget development process considered all of these potential circumstances. In 2021, the college was still experiencing enrollment declines, so things were still not normal. Things have improved in 22, and now in 22-23, a lot of our revenue streams are getting back to where they were before. So declining enrollment is flattened, and the no new revenue tax rate has decreased. When the no new revenue tax rate decreases, it increases the capacity in our property tax revenue ability. And so with enrollment flattening, that helps our projection of tuition revenue. State appropriations has undergone historic reform, and new rules to be determined by the Rules Committee and the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board are to be provided by July 14th. We've talked about that a couple of times. We're expecting that on July 14th, which will give us an idea of our appropriation. So, in listening to Mr. Uxer's request for a financial plan that covers 2 biennia, we are proposing and recommending a 4-year financial model that will address 2 biennia. So what are some of the assumptions we would put into the model? The model would cover 2 legislative years, which will probably have unpredictable funding from the state. Also will cover 2 tuition increases based on board-approved 2-year rate increase schedule in the 2nd year of the biennium. Implies steady property valuation increases with potential tax rate increase to cover a potential salary study and implementation, and assumes regular salary enhancement. So with that in mind, let's see. So we have been working on some of the assumptions in the 4-year financial model that is going to be presented to you today. We're still working on that, and a lot of the revenue projections in here need to be updated. But we thought we'd show you how a 4-year financial planning model might look. In the yellow column that you see here projected for fiscal year 22-23, that's the year we're in right now. And these are the projections that we talked about on previous slides. This column starts with our current no new revenue tax rate of 12.2611 cents per $100 valuation right here. And we have our beginning fund balance of $134,578,663. So we project out revenues for this year of $164,366,468 for the year. And we project out expenses at $132,736,486 in expenditures, resulting in a estimated increase to fund balance of $31,629,982. Now, in this particular model, we have also said, what are we going to do with that increase, that projected increase? So in this particular model, we put the unbudgeted GASB expense that we experience every year and is covered by increase to fund balance and any salary savings in the budget. But we've put it in here to reflect the impact it might have to our projected fund balance increase at the moment. And then also to fund that multi-year capital project that Mr. Lobato presented back in January, we would transfer probably about $10 million to fund his capital projects in the future. Those capital projects are very expensive: roof replacements, chiller replacements. Any kind of deferred maintenance he can get to is a big win for the district. So when you take the estimated increase of $31,629,982, subtract those two proposed line items for GASB and contribution to the reserve fund, it results in a net increase of $17.5 million. Now, adding that to the beginning starting balance of fund balance, let's see how that fund balance is allocated now. So it results in a projected fund balance at the end of the year of $152,088,645. When you compare that fund balance to next year's projected budget of $150,878, that represents over 100% of that budget. But we still need to consider certain other factors in the fund balance. As we continue down the column C in the yellow, the auditors recommend we set aside 15% of our operating budget to cover fund balance. So when we do that calculation, it results in $22,631,739. So we take that away from the beginning fund balance, and we have a fund balance that's available for allocation to GASB 68 and 75. GASB 68 and 75, recall, that hit our fund balance really, really hard in 2016 and in 2018. GASB 68 currently has an impact on our fund balance of $25,315,684. GASB 75 on health insurance impacts our fund balance by $87,690,333. So when we take that away from the fund balance we're rolling forward, that leaves $16,450,889 that's unallocated at this point. Recall in a previous slide we said that the auditors recommend 15% and the rating agencies recommend 25%. So we have the 22 million, 15%. When we add the remaining amount rolling forward of $16.5 million, $16,450,889 rolling forward, it results in fund balance after considering GASBs of $39,082,628, which represents 25.9% of the 23-24 budget, which is in line with the rating agency recommendation. So this particular column is information that we know now. And we were able to project forward. We have pretty realistic numbers at that point. So then the years in the future, modeling into the future. Up here in the left-hand column, column A, we have variable assumptions. we're able to model all of our major revenue sources and do what-if scenarios here. So we start with tuition increase resident, tuition increase non-resident. We have a line item for enrollment growth or decline. And then, should you consider or discuss a property tax increase, that could be modeled here as well. And so also, Ms. Zuniga, who updated this worksheet, added a component for salary enhancement. You could project out the value of a 3 or any percentage salary enhancement here that would be considered into the model. So looking at resident tuition, we discussed how we have adopted a model in 2016 where we would increase tuition every 2 years. We got away from that model during the pandemic for good reason. If we come back to that model where we increase tuition on a 2-year cycle, so that cycle is meant to increase in between appropriation year, then the next year we would do a tuition increase, and then the year after that would be an appropriation, hopefully increase. So it cycles every 2 years to allow the students to graduate with a predictable tuition rate. So when we modeled that pattern into this forecast, we put in $10 resident tuition increase, and then a $14 non-resident tuition increase.
Is that per hour?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Semester credit hour. And so what we have behind this calculation, Mr. Uxer, it's based upon enrollment credit hours from the past.
Yeah. Okay.
So then, what is the value of those $10 resident and $14 non-resident? What kind of revenue would that generate? And so what this model does, by entering those amounts, it results under projected revenues, tuition increase, that would result in $3,031,315 more in tuition revenue. So if you changed it up here and say, I want to increase it not $10, you could put another amount here and then enter that. So the value of that automatically increases the tuition. And you see the value of that. You could do the same thing with a non-resident here. If you say you wanted to go to $25, then you see the value that that has to your tuition revenue in the future of that cycled revenue. So I'm going to return it back because this model is a balanced revenue and expenditure budget. So I keep clicking back. So the other thing that it does is when you change or project the tuition, then you can see how that compares to other years and see what kind of impact it has on a full load to a student. So in this instance, you change the tuition by $10 for resident, $14 for non-resident. Then if you wanted to see what impact or how that compares to another year, then you can go to the back, which changes dynamically when you change it on the front. You see that for 24-25, that period we changed, the value of a 12-hour course would rise to $1,752 for resident students, and it would continue for 2 years at $1,752 for a full load, compared to where we are now at $1,632. So you see the value of that. And then that represents an 8.62% increase in tuition. So it calculates the...
That's based on a 12-hour.
Yes, sir. It is.
Go back to the first slide. Just I want to make that. When you're doing this, you look at column I. I mean, this is not picky, but you all of a sudden you switch to a salary enhancement of 2%. 3,323. Now, either what you do is insert, but you increase each year, so you don't have comparable years and comparable. So either when you showed this slide, you show fiscal year 23-24 at 3% and 2%, then 24 and 25 at 3% and 2%, or fiscal year 25-26 at 3%. But this slide right here, somewhat disingenuous if you really wanted to
do it. You need to either have them comparable all the way across, and this is not.
We can change it to whatever.
Yeah, I know you want, I'm just saying that when you see something like that, all of a sudden it stands out. And so, you know, you need to, if you want to compare, as you say, compare across columns. So anyway, but I know you can sit there and you can do that, but that's fine. I'm just saying, if you want to make this kind of presentation now formally, then
Yes,
you
sir.
need to have a comparable data.
Okay, thank you, sir. So that shows how you can adjust resident tuition, non-resident tuition. If you wanted to project what the value of a tax rate increase would have based upon the certified valuations that we have, if you wanted to do a 5% tax increase, then it would populate the revenue generated from that. In this particular case, a 5% increase would result in $3.5 million. So you see how, and also what it does, it would adjust the no new revenue tax rate. So 5% is still within the voter limit of 8%, and you see what it would do to your overall tax rate here. We are capped at 15%, so we're well under 15 cents per $100 valuation. So that would be the effect of that. So this particular model advances the revenues and expenditure budgets forward, but it allows us to model what-if scenarios. If we did a salary compensation study and we said we're going to do that 2 years from now and has a value of $10 million, well, then we could come back and model what it would take to cover something like that. And so it would determine, you could look at whether to implement it over 2 years, 3 years, and then adjust the revenues accordingly. So that's a quick view of the model. Do you have any questions?
Well, I like it.
No question. So going forward, we're going to update this every year. And so as we learn what the revenues are, we're going to come back and update the model and then update it with enrollment statistics as well. Now that the recurring revenues are more predictable. When the recurring revenues are not predictable, then it becomes much harder to model into the future, given the experiences that we realized in 2020 and 2021. It was very challenging to deal with the current budget, much less going forward.
Well, I just said that my idea of the model is, what I like, we need to keep in mind that this is nothing more than a bunch of big what-ifs.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
Absolutely.
But the thing is that it allows you to, those things that you feel more confident of, you can put those in first. And then it allows you to say, or what your biggest exposure is. And you do, what's the worst case, best case, and forward backwards of what decisions might I have to make, And so nothing is, starting next year, nothing is absolute, but it gives you a feeling as to where your flexibility is and where, hey, we got to cover, we got to put more emphasis here or there or something.
Yes, sir.
Anyone have any questions?
So, next steps. What are the next steps? So we continue recruitment efforts for the summer and the fall, registrations. We update revenue projections with final state appropriations. We compute the no new revenue tax rate upon receipt of the certified appraisal roll in late July and revise our revenue projections. Laura continues to update her baseline budget for additional salaries and savings in June, July, and August. We review the additional funding requests and evaluate those. Review needed critical frozen positions. And then we prepare for the final budget workshop to the Board of Trustees. This is the next to the last slide. And it shows the budget adoption calendar. Hope, as I've said, July 14th, we hope to hear about our appropriation. July 25th, hope to get the certified property valuation from the CAD, Central Appraisal District. And then in July board meeting, consideration of a salary enhancement by Board of Trustees, possibly, potentially. Early August, second budget workshop to the Board of Trustees. We should have very good revenue numbers at that point and be able to do the strategies with more realistic numbers.
So can I ask then, would it be possible then on the considerate, because that's a big deal, you know, and I know that the salary of our staff is very important. But what I like kind of have a difficulty doing is kind of assessing that when we haven't had those final numbers yet. So it's kind of awkward, if you will, come July to make these big considerations when we don't have that full picture. So I'm just requesting if we can have that full picture. But I understand you also have to get whatever you all have to do for payroll purposes. So what can we do about those?
So last year, we did that, or the college had that discussion in the first board meeting in August. So probably.
We can schedule a meeting in between, Ms.
Yeah,
Sanchez.
okay.
We can schedule a special board meeting.
Yeah, just so we know what those final revenue projections are.
Yeah.
Sure.
So in early August, there'll be a second budget workshop to the Board of Trustees. At the August regular board meeting, adoption of the budget by the Board of Trustees at the regular board meeting. At that same meeting, acceptance of certified appraisal roll and adoption of the 2023 tax rate by Board of Trustees. September 1 is the start of the fiscal year. Does anybody have any questions?
Surprise, I have two. First of all, the O&M, I think way back that O&M was a nickel. So I saw something in O&M, but we've made sure that we've allocated enough money in our estimate. Maybe it's the broader question, Dean's question, enough money to cover the new buildings, the additional maintenance of the aging buildings, the additional personnel. In other words, we've got a whole new set of buildings, and so O&M should go up significantly, and I didn't see that as such. I mean, I didn't see a figure. So, but those were satisfied that O&M is covered.
Yeah.
For
So
all
then,
new buildings.
yeah, the nickel that you're referring to was what the coordinating board is utilizing to determine the maintenance and operation for institutions and provide that that leveling up resource. For the college, we allocated based on the new facilities, when we opened those new facilities, Mr. Uxer, obviously we cut back during the pandemic, but we have continued to increase, and one of the contracts that the board approved, if I'm not mistaken, last board meeting was for the, or we have it on coming up, the janitorial
Yes,
services to ensure that we're covering those respective buildings. In addition, we've added to the plant fund annually to Mr. Lobato so that we're able to maintain the current facilities that we have, to provide any renovation and or new construction that is under the limit of what we bring forward based on the college's policies and procedures.
And remember, when we started out in this project of new buildings, one of the things we said is, hey, we need new buildings, but we need to have something that the students, our clients, would be proud of, enjoy, and we need to keep in mind. I mean, yeah, I think this, the maintenance, the old buildings, you know, again, they're old, but El Paso High is old, but it's still classy, and they've taken care of it. You know, we just continue to take care of it. And what we have is going to be good buildings, number one. Number two, out of all of that, don't we have bonds to cover for the new buildings? I didn't see anything. Where's the expense? Is that a separate line item, a budgetary item to pay the bonds for the buildings?
Yeah, we pay our bonds through the general use fee, which is a student fee that goes forward. Mr. Flores could provide a significant amount of information on that. It is a restricted portion of the budget. It is not unrestricted. What we discussed today is the unrestricted budget. But if we needed to increase that fee, we would be coming to the board for that. Currently, we believe that we're in a good situation where we do not need to increase that fee.
Yeah, we discussed that all along in the development.
Yes, sir.
So I'd like to thank the Board of Trustees for their attention and questions, and Dr. Serrata as well, who has reviewed the presentation and made recommendations. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank Josette Shaughnessy, who had a large contribution to this total presentation and still is a force. She's working part-time for the district. And also Ms. Laura Tejas in the Budget Office and her team for advancing the baseline and taking all the submissions and working all that magic. In addition, in the VP's office, Juanita Martinez and Sylvia De Lucio for preparing the presentation. And last but not least, if you haven't met Ms. Zuniga, our comptroller, she did the budget revenue projections were hers, and she updated the model. So thank you very much.
Sir, I just have one question on the projected salary enhancement. Once you have the final figures that you will be receiving and presenting to us sometime in early August, can you also include a 6%?
We can.
6%.
Yes, ma'am.
I would take off the 1% and just start with 2 and go to 6.
Absolutely. We'll do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flores. Members of the board, I have one other item that doesn't need, it just need to pass this out for your review and for your self-evaluation. If we can get these back to us, you can provide them to Dr. Penley and/or to Pam by the 31st of July. But this is an annual event that we have to go forward with based on our accrediting agency who has provided us, we haven't gotten the final official word, but I did get the phone call from Dr. Glover indicating, as I let Judge Haggerty know, that the college has no further action to move forward with regards to accreditation. We are fully reaccredited. The 2 items that we had pending, the board reviewed them in June and subsequently approved our full reaffirmation. So we're waiting to see the official notice on the website before we alert the entire college community, but wanted to share that with the board. And part of that is that the board does do a self-evaluation. So I will pass these out to the board members.
Do we have a sign?
They're anonymous.
And then I remind the board that we do have a photographer here. We want to take a group picture, but I've seen others that have been taking photos, so I encourage everyone to take those photos. I already took mine and didn't break the camera, so you all are safe. That is it, Dr. Graham? You
Well,
can
we
adjourn.
have no other business at this time, so that concludes our meeting here until 4:30, which gives us a half an hour to complete the evaluation and turn it in.
And take photos.
We got till July 31st.
Can we get a motion to
Yeah,
adjourn?
you have
Okay.
to take photos.
Motion to adjourn.
Yay.
Second?
You don't need a second.
All in favor?
Any opposed? No.